Hello and welcome back to a DLC episode with me, Joey. Today I'm here to talk to you about a game called Achilles Legends Untold. The game has been out for a little while on a few platforms from Steam, PlayStation and Xbox, but this episode is just a couple of days after the release of Achilles Legends Untold on Switch. So I just want to thank Darkport Games for giving us a review copy, as well as Terminals for providing that to us. Just as a real disclaimer, we did receive a free copy of this game for this review. So Achilles Legends Untold is the story of, big surprise, Achilles. It's a Souls-like game with a Diablo-style camera, I think is the best way to describe it. It's that top-down, maybe 45-degree angle look at the combat that you are in. And there's a lot to really like about this game. I played it on Xbox. The performance was great. I didn't get any drop frames, and the game ran really, really smoothly. The graphics were good. They felt like a next-gen release. There were points where the camera, because of the way that it was positioned, showed a huge background, like you might have seen in the thumbnail of this review. And I was really in awe of some of the sets that they'd managed to create with quite a limited camera view, I think. The introduction to the game itself is done in the style of hand-drawn art, and I think that the voiceover and the art that accompany this are really, really impressive. It sets up the Battle of Troy, and you jump into game as Achilles, and with your men, infiltrate Troy and die. So that's the very start of the game. There, like I said, there's a lot to really like about this game, and I played it for about 6 hours for this review, and I will go back and finish it. But whilst there was a lot to enjoy, I feel like there was a few things left to be desired. Like I said, in the introduction, the voiceover was really good. The person who did it really set up the tone for the game very, very well, and I felt like I was about to embark on this epic quest. When you get into the gameplay, however, I feel like the voice acting leaves a little bit to be desired. The lead actor who's playing Achilles is sometimes a bit monotone, and you hear quite a lot of the same dialogue lines repeated throughout the game. But the very first thing he says is a rousing speech to 7 or 8, maybe 9 soldiers. And then they're meant to cheer and be rallied by what he said, but in the rallying cry of your men, I could only hear one person quite lazily cheering themselves into battle. I played this game on normal difficulty. When it comes for loading it, there is easy, medium, and hard. Played it on the medium because it's the one that I normally play on. I felt the game was very, very, very easy, and that extended throughout all of the Troy section. Now, I'm fully aware that this is a tutorial level, but I feel like if you are trying to go with a Souls-like game, to have a half-hour tutorial that feels very easy was maybe a little bit too forgiving for the player. But at the end of the tutorial section is when you die and you get put into the actual game, which is this open world, as I said, almost top-down view to a Souls-like game, and the world itself is interesting. I felt like I was rewarded for going off and exploring throughout the land. I was rewarded by gaining XP, fighting interesting bosses, finding interesting weapons, and then eventually you come across like a shadow world where you can switch between the normal world and the shadow world. And what this does is it allows a Metroidvania-esque game mechanic where once you've unlocked this ability, certain areas that are walled off by shadowed spikes that Achilles won't pass in the normal world, you can then cross into the dark world, the netherworld, in Hades, and traverse through them with ease. The game itself, like I said, it takes place on an absolutely massive open world map. And there are several routes throughout each area to achieve the same goal. So I feel like, as I said, exploration is really, really encouraged. But if exploring off the beaten path isn't your thing, you have a mini map in the top corner, and this will often give you a dotted line that says, look, this is your quickest way to your objective, but you're never punished for going off of that dotted line. I found that there were side quests within this game that were really interesting. There was one that I particularly remember of a man whose daughter had disappeared in the night and gone off into the dark wood, and you had to go and find her, only to find that she'd been killed by wolves. And then you had to, it didn't just stop at finding her and going, well, she's dead, that's it, that's the end of my mission. You had to go back, and there wasn't a reward for that mission because the man was so distraught by the loss of his daughter. And I think that in itself was a challenge to my expectation of the game, which is something I really welcome. The story of Achilles Legends Untold focus, as I said, on Achilles. And if you don't know, Achilles was a great soldier and revered by the army that he fought in. As I said, Achilles dies in the fight in Troy with Paris, and he's brought back to the underworld of Hades, and he needs to know why he's still here, what happened in Troy, why is there undead monsters wandering around, and the point in this game is for you to traverse the open world and get the answers to these questions. I think that the game does that, I don't want to say really well, but it does it okay. I found that because I was so rewarded for the exploration, it took me a very long time to even do the second or third mission. And by then, I'd massively over-leveled my character, but that was okay because the areas that I was exploring when going away from the main mission were designed for higher level players, so there was still a challenge within the game. Now, with any Souls-like game, one of the big pulls, and one of the pulls for me, was the bosses. The bosses were interesting. I wouldn't say they were challenging because of the way that Achilles Legends Untold combat runs. It's not particularly difficult combat. What is difficult within it is the number of enemies you can be fighting at any one time. But most of the bosses are on a one-on-one basis. So you can attack the boss and retreat in all of the very large arenas that you fight them in, heal yourself if you need to before they've even got near you, and then have attacked again before the boss knows what's hit them. What I found more difficult than the bosses was the open areas where you could have 7, 8, maybe 9 or more basic enemies all swinging at you at once, and really, I would say whittling down your health, but absolutely tanking your health. This is where the Shrine of Hades come in. Now, for any Dark Souls veterans or Bloodborne veterans, Elden Ring, those kind of games, the Shrine of Hades is your bonfire. So you visit the Shrine of Hades and it becomes a walk point. It becomes an area for you to rest and regain your life. It becomes an area for you to level up, which I'll get onto in just a second. But if you decide to rest at these Shrines of Hades, when you level up, everyone you killed and battled between your last stop at a Shrine of Hades or your last death is revived, and the world is alive again with enemies teeming across it trying to kill you. Because of what I've said about the combat not being particularly challenging, though, I did find myself, for a very long time, traveling between Shrines of Hades, marking them as completed but not resting. And then when I was going back through to get to the main story of the mission, the world felt quite empty because I'd already emptied it. I didn't feel like they needed the Dark Souls mechanic of rest and everyone will return. I actually think they would have been better off with a simple respawn system. I think that the leveling up system in this game is something that's really interesting. If you've ever played Skyrim, you look up at the constellations and then you use a star as a level up point. It's exactly the same in Hades, but the way it's done is you have to have completed the one before to get the next one in that constellation. And then when you complete a constellation, you get an ability or an extra attack or extra life, depending on which constellation you've completed. So I found myself going and upgrading all of my strength with a single constellation. Then at the end of it, I was given an attack that was stronger than anything else that I had. I've used the word Dark Souls and Soulsborne a lot in this review, and that is because this is and clearly takes inspiration from Dark Souls games. One of the things I think it does very differently, though, is you have what's called a Fury attack, and you have a Fury meter which you build up throughout combat. Now, your Fury attack is something that you can switch in and out, and it'll just mix up the way that you take on a horde of enemies. They can range from a simple kick that will stagger any regular human-sized enemy to being able to throw your shield and have it magically return to you like some kind of insane boomerang. That was the one I went for. I found it very useful. I think if I was to give Achilles Legends Untold a rating, I think it's a good game. I think it's an impressive first outing from Dark Point Games, who are a relatively small studio, and I think that with this now being out on Switch, I would be far more inclined to play it because it feels like a game you would play on the go. Like I said, I played it on Xbox, it performed really well, and I will finish it. What I've read is that there is sort of between 20 to 25 hours worth of content if you complete the story and all the side quests. I think if you just do the story, it's much closer to the sort of 10-hour mark. If I had to give this a rating out of 10, I think I'd give it a 7 out of 10. I really enjoyed the different sets and all of the Greek mythology that was thrown at you within my playthrough. I really enjoyed the world itself and thought that the labyrinthian paths that you had to follow really made for what felt like an epic experience. But I felt a little bit let down by the voice acting throughout the game, and it kind of took the immersion a little bit away every time I heard the same dialogue options throughout combat. So if you want to check out Achilles Legends Untold, it is on Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, and now Switch as of the 23rd of January 2025. Once again, thank you to Dark Point Games for giving us the review copy, and I'll see you next time.